Hey everyone, my name is Ethan. I'm 29 years old, and if you think your family is weird, wait until you hear mine. Buckle up, because what I'm about to share is wild, messy, and honestly still hard to believe myself. Stick around until the end, because you'll see how the people who treated me like a servant my entire life suddenly had no power over me after one shocking revelation. It all started at my grandfather's funeral. Grandpa James had always been this larger-than-life figure in our family, wealthy, eccentric, and the only person who ever seemed to genuinely care about me. My parents, Rebecca and Martin, however, treated me more like a household employee than their own son. I cooked, cleaned, ran errands, fixed their cars, picked up dry cleaning, and basically existed to make their lives easier. Birthdays, holidays, even my own minor successes were background noise. If I asked for anything, it was met with sighs or passive-aggressive reminders of how much they had done for me. Walking into the funeral home that day, I felt the familiar knot of resentment mixed with sadness. Grandpa James had passed peacefully in his sleep, but the tension in the room was palpable. Extended family whispered about the estate, his business, and who would inherit what. I tried to stay quiet, fade into the background like usual, but something in the air felt different. During the eulogy, I watched people offer condolences to my parents, patting them on the back, praising them for raising a fine family. I felt invisible, a minor character in the story of my own life. And then my Uncle Greg leaned over and whispered something that made my stomach drop. Grandpa mentioned something about leaving you a part of the estate. I laughed nervously. Yeah, right. Me? The guy who spent decades fetching coffee and folding laundry for this family? I shook my head and thought I must have misheard. Maybe he meant a token gift, surely not anything substantial. After the service, everyone gathered at the lawyer's office for the reading of the will. My parents sat stiffly, smug smiles plastered across their faces, as if they already owned the future. I lingered near the back, hands shoved in my pockets, trying not to be noticed. The lawyer began reading the will, his voice deliberate, the kind that made every sentence feel like it carried weight. And finally, a special note regarding Ethan. My heart started pounding. Every eye in the room turned toward me. The lawyer cleared his throat. Ethan, your grandfather wanted you to know that despite the way others may have treated you, he saw your loyalty, your hard work, and your integrity. He has decided to leave you a sum of $85 million. The room went silent. My parents' mouths dropped open, faces pale. I couldn't breathe for a second. 85 million. That wasn't a typo. That wasn't some minor inheritance. That was a life-changing, earth-shattering money, and it was mine. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, anger, disbelief, exhilaration. All those years of being treated like a servant, of being overlooked and undervalued, suddenly flipped on their head. I looked at my parents, Rebecca and Martin, and saw them for what they truly were, entitled, arrogant, and utterly unprepared for the fact that the invisible kid was suddenly the most powerful person in the room. My Uncle Greg leaned in, smirking a little. Well, I guess your grandfather always had good taste. I barely heard him. My focus was on my parents' faces, the mixture of shock, denial, and fear that I had never seen before. After the reading, everyone tried to approach me, condolences mixed with awkward attempts to charm, to justify, to explain that they had always supported me. I laughed softly, a little bitterly. Supported? Sure, if fetching your dry cleaning counts as support. The absurdity was almost comical. I left the office before anyone could corner me. Outside, I breathed in the cool autumn air, feeling the weight of reality settle in. This was my life now. $85 million. My choice, my freedom, my chance to finally live on my own terms. For the first time, I realized I didn't have to tolerate their insults, their demands, their petty control. I could walk away. I could redefine my life entirely. And yet, fear yawned at me. What would I do first? How would I handle the family dynamics? Could I trust anyone? My entire life had been shaped by submission and obedience. Suddenly, I had power, but no roadmap for wielding it responsibly. I thought about all the moments I had felt invisible, all the times my parents laughed at my failures or dismissed my achievements. Would I get revenge, or would I rise above? In that moment, standing alone on the curb outside the lawyer's office, I felt a strange mixture of liberation and anxiety. The world looked different now, like someone had wiped away the old rules and handed me a blank page. The possibilities were exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. Stay with me, because in the next part, I'll explain how I navigated my first confrontations with my parents, the shocking things they said when they realized I had more power than they ever imagined, and how I began to feel what it truly meant to reclaim your life. And trust me, the twists are only starting. This inheritance wasn't just money. It was a key to freedom, and everyone around me suddenly wanted a piece. The next morning, I woke up with a strange mixture of excitement and dread. $85 million. My entire life had been shaped by the way Rebecca and Martin treated me, a combination of neglect, control, and thinly veiled contempt. For decades, I had been invisible, a servant in their household, a placeholder for their convenience. And now, in the span of a few hours, everything had changed. Breakfast was awkward. My parents were trying desperately to act normal, but the tension was palpable. Their eyes darted to mine repeatedly, searching for reactions, trying to gauge if I had figured it out yet. I kept calm, pretending to sip coffee casually, but inside, I was buzzing. Rebecca leaned forward, voice a little too sweet. "Ethan, we know Grandpa loved you, but this is so unexpected. Are you sure you understand the responsibilities that come with such a gift?" Responsibilities? I nearly laughed. Responsibilities didn't mean catering to their every whim for 30 years. Responsibilities didn't include being their emotional punching bag. But I kept my expression neutral. "Yes, I understand." Martin chimed in, voice low, almost threatening. "We just want to make sure you're not being hasty. Grandpa built this estate with decades of hard work. It's not just money, it's legacy. Are you prepared to manage it wisely?" I looked at them directly, calm but firm. "I appreciate the warning. I'm fully aware of what I've inherited. And yes, I'll manage it responsibly." Their faces shifted subtly, surprise, disbelief, and then irritation. I realized something important. They had never expected me to assert myself. For them, I had always been compliant, obedient, and malleable. They had never imagined the day I would hold the cards. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was my lawyer. "Ethan, just confirming that the transfer is scheduled. You officially have control starting next week." That little message made the world feel unrecognizable. Control. My life, my money, my decisions, all mine. But with power came immediate friction. Rebecca tried the emotional route first. "Ethan, think about your brother and me. We've sacrificed so much for you. Isn't it right to consider us in your plans?" I shook my head internally. Sacrificed. They had demanded my labor, my time, my energy, but offered affection sparingly, often conditional. Their sacrifices were just the baseline of parental responsibility, twisted to sound heroic. I kept my tone polite but firm. "I'll make decisions that are best for me, as Grandpa intended. I appreciate everything, but my life and this inheritance are not negotiable." Martin tried intimidation next. He leaned closer, voice dropping. "Ethan, don't make this harder than it has to be. We can work something out. You don't want to create enemies in your own family. Enemies? I almost chuckled. I'm not creating enemies. I'm just setting boundaries. This isn't personal. It's necessary. Over the next few days, their tactics escalated. Small manipulations, emotional appeals, subtle guilt trips. Rebecca would casually drop comments about how lonely they were, how much they needed me around. Martin tried reasoning with me, claiming Grandpa would have wanted me to share the wealth with them. Through it all, I stayed calm. I wrote everything down, documented interactions, and reminded myself, I don't owe them obedience, gratitude, or access to my life. I had been invisible my whole life, but now I had leverage, and leverage meant I could finally claim respect. One evening, Rebecca confronted me directly. Ethan, please, don't make this so cold. You don't understand what it's like to be in our position. Grandpa would want you to include us. I shook my head internally. Sacrificed. They had demanded my labor, my time, my energy, but offered affection sparingly, often conditional. Their sacrifices were just the baseline of parental responsibility, twisted to sound heroic. I kept my tone polite but firm. I'll make decisions that are best for me, as Grandpa intended. I appreciate everything, but my life and this inheritance are not negotiable. Martin tried intimidation next. He leaned closer, voice dropping. Ethan, don't make this harder than it has to be. We can work something out. You don't want to create enemies in your own family. Enemies? I almost chuckled. I'm not creating enemies. I'm just setting boundaries. This isn't personal. It's necessary. Over the next few days, their tactics escalated. Small manipulations, emotional appeals, subtle guilt trips. Rebecca would casually drop comments about how lonely they were, how much they needed me around. Martin tried reasoning with me, claiming Grandpa would have wanted me to share the wealth with them. Through it all, I stayed calm. I wrote everything down, documented interactions, and reminded myself, I don't owe them obedience, gratitude, or access to my life. I had been invisible my whole life, but now I had leverage, and leverage meant I could finally claim respect. One evening, Rebecca confronted me directly. Ethan, please, don't make this so cold. You don't understand what it's like to be in our position. Grandpa would want you to include us. I looked her in the eyes. I understand more than you realize. I understand that I spent years being treated like a servant in my own home. I understand that you never valued me for who I am. Grandpa's gift isn't for you, it's for me, and I will decide how it's used. Her expression faltered. Surprise, shock, a flicker of fear. She had expected tears, compliance, or panic, not a firm, unwavering stance. That moment, small as it was, marked a turning point. I was no longer the boy who did everything for them without question. I was someone who could stand on his own, unshaken. Martin tried one last tactic, appeals to fear. You'll regret this. Family is everything, Ethan. Money can't replace love. I sighed internally. Love? They had long since proven that their love came with conditions. I replied calmly, I've felt love in the right places. I've been respected by people who cared about me for me, not for what I could do for them. I won't trade freedom for the illusion of love that never existed. That night, I lay in bed, heart racing, mind spinning. The fear hadn't disappeared. It never fully does when you take control from those who held power over you. But the exhilaration was intoxicating. For the first time, I realized that I didn't have to live under their rules, their expectations, or their manipulations. I had Grandpa's gift, yes, but more importantly, I had autonomy. And as I drifted off to sleep, a single thought anchored me. I was no longer a servant. I was in charge. I was seen. And my life, finally, could belong to me.
Stay with me, because in the next part, I'll reveal how I used my new position to redefine relationships, set boundaries, and shock my parents even further. And trust me, the drama is just heating up. The real test of their entitlement is yet to come.
The morning after my first real confrontation with Rebecca and Martin, I felt a strange mixture of relief and anticipation. Relief because I had finally spoken my truth and set boundaries. Anticipation because I knew they wouldn't just accept it quietly. The stakes were too high. $85 million, decades of perceived entitlement, and years of ingrained behavior. They had been used to calling the shots in my life. Now the power dynamic had flipped. I started by organizing everything. Legal documents, letters from Grandpa James, financial statements. Every piece of paper was a shield and a weapon. My lawyer, Mr. Thompson, was brilliant and meticulous. "Ethan," he said, "you've got full control. Any attempt by your parents to claim this is baseless. Legally, you are untouchable. Emotionally, that's another story." I smiled. Emotionally untouchable sounded like a challenge I was ready to accept. Rebecca tried charm first. She invited me for lunch under the guise of family bonding, using the soft, sugary tone I'd known my whole life. But I saw through it. I agreed, but my mind was alert. Every word, every gesture logged, analyzed. She poured wine, complimented my appearance, and tried small talk. "You know, Ethan," she said casually, "Grandpa always said you had a good head on your shoulders. Such a shame that money complicates things." I nodded politely. Money only complicates things if people let it. Grandpa trusted me with it because he knew I'd handle it wisely. Her smile faltered. Of course, but don't forget family comes first. Sometimes legacy is about sharing, not hoarding." Sharing? I remembered the decades of unpaid labor, of emotional manipulation, of dismissals and ridicule. I let my voice remain calm, almost serene. Family comes first in love and respect, not in entitlement. Grandpa didn't give me this to be shared because I owed anyone obedience or subservience. He gave it to me because he believed in me. I won't squander that trust. I watched as her face shifted from sweetness to disbelief. That subtle fear was deliciously satisfying, but I reminded myself to stay composed. Power was not for gloating, it was for establishing control and reclaiming dignity. Martin, on the other hand, tried intimidation. He cornered me later that day in the study. "Ethan, think carefully. You're making enemies in your own home. One wrong move and you'll regret it. You think this money makes you independent, but it doesn't erase family obligations." I didn't flinch. I leaned casually against the bookshelf, letting my calmness radiate like armor. "I don't make enemies. I set boundaries. Your notion of obligation was one-sided for decades. This money doesn't erase the past, but it allows me to live free of it, and if that makes you uncomfortable, that's your problem, not mine." He sputtered, searching for a retort. I could see the realization dawning. The obedient child they had molded was gone. The timid, malleable Ethan no longer existed. Over the next week, subtle manipulations escalated. Rebecca tried emotional appeals, leaving notes around the house. "Don't forget where you came from," and "Family is everything, Ethan. Don't let money blind you." I read them, sighed, and filed them away. They were reminders, nothing more. Martin attempted more direct intimidation, conversations about legal loopholes, suggestions of potential family disputes, hints about outside advisors who could pressure me. I smiled inwardly. Let them try. Every conversation, every tactic, every veiled threat I met with calm certainty. I wasn't reacting emotionally anymore. I was strategizing. I also realized the psychological effect on them. Every attempt to manipulate me met with calm resistance, and the frustration was palpable. The subtle power shift was intoxicating. I didn't need to be cruel or vindictive. Simply being firm, composed, and unyielding was enough. Emotionally, it was a roller coaster. Some nights I felt guilt creeping in. Had I been too harsh? Was I overreacting? But then I remembered the years of invisible servitude, the dismissals, the constant undermining.
This wasn't harshness, it was justice. The first major test came when Rebecca suggested a family meeting to discuss the future of the inheritance. She and Martin tried to frame it as cooperative, but the underlying intent was obvious: intimidation, guilt, and manipulation. I agreed, fully prepared. At the meeting, my calm demeanor unsettled them immediately. They expected panic, tears, or at least hesitation. They got none. I laid out a plan: financial advisors, independent legal counsel, strict boundaries on family access, and rules for any involvement they might have in the estate. Every point was backed by documents, emails, or Grandpa's explicit instructions. Rebecca attempted a classic guilt trip. "Ethan, don't you think Grandpa would have wanted you to care for us?" I shook my head, voice steady. "Grandpa wanted me to be free, to be responsible, to live with dignity. Caring for you doesn't mean giving up my autonomy. It doesn't mean tolerating disrespect or manipulation. I will honor his wishes, and I will do it my way." Martin tried legal threats, vague suggestions about potential disputes, insinuations of outside advisors. I leaned back, unconcerned. "You can try, but every legal action you consider will be countered with full transparency, as is my right. Grandpa's intentions are clear, and I'm prepared." By the end of the meeting, the subtle terror was visible in their faces. They had spent decades controlling me, belittling me, undermining my confidence, and now every tool they had used was useless. I had reclaimed not just the money, but the power to dictate how my life would unfold. That night, alone in my apartment, I felt a rush of emotions: relief, pride, exhilaration, and a strange, bittersweet sorrow. Freedom was intoxicating, but the cost was seeing my parents exposed for what they truly were: entitled, manipulative, and unprepared for the reality that I no longer belonged to them. The next days were quieter, but the psychological shift had fully occurred. I had proven to myself and to them that I could stand my ground. I was no longer a boy who cleaned, cooked, and obeyed. I was a man with wealth, autonomy, and the courage to defend both. Stay with me, because in the next part, I'll reveal how I started building my life independently, the shocking reactions of extended family, and the first moments when I truly felt the power of freedom. The drama is far from over. This inheritance is not just money, it's a ticket to a life no one else controls. The first morning after securing control over Grandpa James's estate, I woke up in my apartment with an unfamiliar sense of calm. No one was demanding my attention, no one was critiquing my every move. The silence felt almost sacred. I brewed coffee, stared out the window at the city skyline, and let myself imagine a life completely on my own terms. Freedom tasted bitter and sweet all at once. I decided the first step was taking practical control. I met with my financial advisors, planned investments, and mapped out my future. The numbers were staggering. $85 million wasn't just life-changing, it was transformative. I could pay off debts, secure my family's future, pursue passions, and, most importantly, build a life that didn't revolve around pleasing others. But independence wasn't just financial, it was psychological. For decades, Rebecca and Martin had instilled habits of compliance, of always putting them first. I caught myself hesitating, waiting for approval that would never come. I reminded myself, this was my life. My grandfather's trust in me was proof I could make my own decisions. Then came the tricky part: extended family. Cousins, aunts, uncles, all curious, some subtly envious. They asked innocuous questions about Grandpa's will, dropped hints about family responsibilities, or tried to subtly influence my choices. At first, I listened politely, smiled, and nodded, but soon I realized I needed to assert boundaries clearly. I called a family meeting, the first of its kind. Everyone gathered, expecting to charm or pressure me. I walked in, calm, collected, and surprisingly confident. I laid out my intentions: clear management of the estate, financial transparency, and strict limits on involvement. This wasn't a lecture, It was a declaration. I wasn't negotiating. I was communicating my decisions. Rebecca's face contorted with disbelief. Martin's jaw tightened. Even some cousins exchanged uneasy glances. No one expected me to assert myself so firmly. I let the silence linger, letting the weight of my words settle. I appreciate all your interest, I said, but this inheritance is a responsibility Grandpa entrusted to me, not a tool for anyone's entitlement. I will consult with legal advisors, manage funds wisely, and make decisions independently. My autonomy is non-negotiable. The subtle terror and shock on their faces were almost funny. For decades, I had been invisible. Suddenly, I was the central figure, and they had no leverage. The following weeks were about action. I restructured investments, started philanthropy programs Grandpa had supported, and even launched a small business venture I dreamed about for years. Each decision was deliberate, measured, and empowering. I was no longer a boy who waited for permission. I was a man shaping his destiny. Rebecca and Martin tried occasional interventions, subtle manipulation, guilt trips, or veiled threats about family unity. But I met each attempt with calm clarity. I realized that their power over me had always been psychological. With wealth came confidence, but with confidence came immunity to manipulation. I didn't need to fight with anger or sarcasm. Composure alone was enough to shift the balance. Emotionally, it was exhausting but exhilarating. Some nights, I would lie awake, processing years of mistreatment and realizing how much I had internalized their disregard. There were tears, yes, but also laughter at the absurdity of it all. Decades of obedience now inverted by one single twist of fate, Grandpa's will. Friends noticed the change. They commented on my newfound calm, decisiveness, and even humor. I began socializing differently, making plans independently, enjoying experiences I had once deferred to family needs. Each outing, each decision reinforced my sense of self-worth. One evening, I decided to confront my parents directly, not in anger, but in clarity. I told them that I valued them as my family, but my life would no longer be dictated by their expectations. Rebecca's lips trembled. Martin's usual composed facade cracked. They tried to argue, to convince me of obligations and tradition, but I remained firm. For the first time, I felt equal, not in money alone, but in psychological standing. The tables had turned. I wasn't a servant. I wasn't invisible. I was seen, and more importantly, I had claimed the life that had always been mine in spirit, if not in practice. I also realized that freedom doesn't mean isolation. I chose relationships based on respect, loyalty, and genuine connection, not obligation or fear. People who had valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide became central in my life. For the first time, I understood that love and respect were reciprocal, not conditional on servitude. The most striking moment came during a casual dinner with close friends. I shared a simple toast: to autonomy, to respect, and to making decisions that honor who we are, not who others expect us to be. The clinking of glasses felt symbolic. My life had shifted from survival under authority to thriving under self-determination. Stay with me, because in the next part, I'll reveal the most shocking twist yet: how my parents' desperation escalated, the attempts to regain control, and the moment when I finally had to decide whether to forgive, confront, or cut ties entirely.
It started subtly, a message from Rebecca, carefully crafted, dripping with faux concern. Ethan, I worry about the path you're taking. Family isn't just money. You risk alienating everyone you love. I stared at my phone, thumb hovering over the screen. Alienating? I had spent decades being invisible, ignored, and treated like a servant. Now I had power, and she tried to frame it as betrayal. I deleted the message and took a deep breath. This was going to be the final test, not just of my wealth, but of my resolve.
That evening, Rebecca and Martin arrived at my apartment unannounced. Their faces were carefully neutral, but their eyes betrayed urgency and fear. They expected panic, negotiation, maybe even tears. They got none. I calmly welcomed them in, offering water, keeping my expression neutral. "Ethan," Rebecca began, voice light but tense, "we just want to talk about the estate. Surely there's room for compromise." I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "The estate is handled. Grandpa's wishes are clear. My decisions are final. There's no compromise on autonomy or respect." Martin stepped forward, trying intimidation. "You think you're untouchable, but money doesn't erase obligations. Family matters." I shook my head, calm, composed, unyielding. "I understand obligations. I fulfilled my duties for decades under your direction. Now it's my turn. I decide what matters. I choose boundaries, independence, and respect. If that upsets you, I'm sorry, but reality doesn't bend to comfort your egos." The tension in the room was palpable. I watched as the familiar expressions of arrogance and entitlement shifted to confusion, then fear. They had controlled me for decades, and suddenly their entire playbook was useless. Every threat, guilt trip, and manipulation fell flat. They tried another tactic, emotional blackmail. Rebecca's voice wavered. "Ethan, don't you care about how this affects the family? Don't you love us?" I took a measured breath. Love isn't measured in control or obedience. It's respect, trust, and care. I have all that in my life already, from people who value me for me, not my servitude. I loved you enough to follow your rules for years. That ends today. Martin's hands trembled slightly. He opened his mouth, closed it, searched for words that might sway me. None worked. I realized that power wasn't just about money. It was composure, clarity, and moral certainty. I was grounded in the truth of my own experiences, and that truth couldn't be bargained with. Then came the legal escalation. They threatened to contest the will, implying manipulation or undue influence. I calmly handed over a file of documented communications, emails, and Grandpa's explicit instructions. Every claim was dismantled before it could take shape. My lawyer, Mr. Thompson, ensured that they had no standing. Through it all, I remained composed. I refused to let anger dictate my actions, though the temptation was intense. Instead, I focused on strategy. I documented everything, kept my plans transparent with legal oversight, and maintained control over every interaction. A pivotal moment came when Rebecca, frustrated and defeated, burst into tears. Not tears of genuine sorrow, but tears of entitlement unraveling. Martin, silent, visibly shaken, realized the child they had tried to control was now the person in charge. I didn't gloat, but I didn't flinch either. I simply observed, understanding the power of calm and clarity. By the end of the confrontation, it was clear they had lost. Their attempts to manipulate, intimidate, or guilt me into submission had failed. I had not just defended my inheritance, I had reclaimed my dignity, my life, and my sense of self. Later, alone, I reflected on the emotional storm. Fear, relief, exhilaration, and a strange sorrow mingled together. Decades of suppression had deep scars, but facing the final challenge with composure brought an unprecedented sense of empowerment. I was free, truly free. The last twist was unexpected. Even in victory, I felt a strange sense of responsibility, not to my parents, but to myself and Grandpa's vision. This inheritance wasn't just money. It was a key to a life that belonged entirely to me, free from manipulation, free from control, and full of potential. Stay with me, because in the next and final part, I'll share how life unfolds after this battle, the unexpected freedom, the choices I made for myself, and the dramatic, emotional conclusions that reshaped my relationships forever. The story isn't just about money. It's about power, respect, and the courage to reclaim your life.
The first morning of complete independence felt surreal. No one was hovering, no one was judging, no one was waiting for me to comply with invisible rules. I brewed my coffee, sat by the window, and let the city wake around me. For decades, I had existed in the shadows, unseen, unheard, performing tasks for people who claimed to love me. Now, the world felt vast and mine. I spent that week focusing on what freedom really meant. It wasn't just financial. $85 million gave me options, yes, but it was the ability to make decisions without fear, to pursue passions, to nurture relationships that were genuine and reciprocal. I revisited hobbies I had neglected, friends I had ignored for family obligations, and even took a solo trip, something I had never dared before. The psychological shift was profound. Each choice, each step reinforced the truth. I was capable, worthy, and in control. I no longer reacted to attempts at manipulation from Rebecca or Martin. Their texts, calls, and emails went unanswered, calmly ignored. I had no anger toward them anymore, only a sense of clarity. My past with them was a chapter I controlled, not a script I was forced to follow. I began structuring my life around autonomy and meaningful connections. I invested in projects I cared about, supported causes Grandpa had cherished, and made decisions that reflected my values. Every action was deliberate, intentional, and a declaration of independence. For the first time, I felt the weight of choice rather than obligation. Friends noticed the change immediately. They commented on my composure, confidence, and newfound sense of humor. Some were shocked by how I had confronted my parents, defended my inheritance, and remained unshaken. But inside, I felt something even stronger, a sense of self-respect that had been buried for decades. A turning point came when I received a final message from Rebecca. "Ethan, we only wanted what we thought was fair. I hope someday you'll understand." I read it, paused, and then deleted it. Understanding? I understood perfectly. I understood the manipulation, the entitlement, and the years of invisibility. But I also understood that forgiveness, if it were to exist, had to be on my terms. And I decided to let it go, not because I owed them anything, but because my life was too valuable to tether to their expectations. Martin tried one last time, asking to meet and talk about family reconciliation. I agreed not to negotiate, but to set the record straight. The conversation was brief, calm, direct, unyielding. I explained my boundaries, my vision, and my decision to live a life unshaped by their manipulation. By the end, their expressions were a mixture of defeat and incredulity. For decades, they had believed control over me was inevitable. They had been wrong. With that chapter closed, I finally allowed myself to feel the full breadth of freedom. Fear, which had once been a constant companion, dissipated. Excitement and possibility took its place. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving anymore. I wasn't merely living under the shadow of authority, I was authoring my own life. The most dramatic realization came quietly one evening. I stood in my apartment, looking out at the city lights, reflecting on the twists and turns that had led here. The fear, the tension, the manipulations, they were all gone. In their place was clarity, strength, and a profound understanding of my own worth. The past could no longer dictate my future. I was seen, I was heard, and I was free. I thought about Grandpa James and how he had trusted me with such an incredible gift. It wasn't just money, it was affirmation of who I was, a recognition of resilience, integrity, and patience. I realized that every moment of feeling invisible, every task I had performed under duress, had prepared me for this moment, for owning my life fully without apology or compromise. I laughed softly at the absurdity of it all. For decades, I had been a shadow in my own home, and now, in just a few short weeks, I had reclaimed not only my inheritance, but my identity. Every memory of mistreatment became a lesson in strategy, patience, and courage. Every fear transformed into a stepping stone toward empowerment.
By the end of that week, my life was entirely reshaped. I had a clear sense of boundaries with my parents, meaningful relationships with friends who valued me, and the freedom to explore possibility without constraint. The dramatic, tense battles, the psychological warfare, and the near constant anxiety culminated in a moment of liberation that was deeply satisfying. As I sit here reflecting, I realize this story isn't just about money or family. It's about reclaiming your life from those who diminish you, finding strength in adversity, and discovering the courage to assert your worth. Power is not given, it's earned, recognized, and protected. And finally, after decades of being unseen, I am visible. I am free. I am alive. How would you handle a situation like this? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective.